Hi, I'm Callan. I came home after 3 weeks in a psychiatric facility, thinking the hardest part would be walking back into a life I wasn't sure I still belonged to. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing my family had already decided I didn't. It started with a silence that felt off. Not the peaceful kind, just empty. The air in my apartment was different. The light bulbs had been changed. Someone had swapped the cinnamon candle on my table for something floral I would never choose. The throw pillows on my couch were fluffed the way Jenna did hers, not the way I liked them. Buddy didn't come running to the door. There were no barks, no excited claws on the hardwood floor. Just a folded slip of paper taped to the fridge. Took Buddy to the lake for the weekend. He's been so much happier at ours. Hope that's okay. Jenna. My hand curled around the handle of the pharmacy bag I was still holding. Inside, mood stabilizers, my discharge plan, and a printout that gently reminded me not to make any big decisions for at least 2 weeks. Too late. They arrived just after 6, breezing through my front door like it still belonged to them. Jenna smiled like she hadn't taken something from me. Ellis dropped his duffel near my entryway like they were just visiting. Buddy bolted toward me the moment he saw me, tail wagging, eyes wide, body vibrating with the loyalty only dogs can sustain without question. I dropped to my knees. He licked my face like it hadn't been days, like I hadn't vanished. For a second, I forgot what they'd done. Then Ellis spoke. He's really adjusted at our place. Honestly, it might be better for him to stay. I didn't answer. Jenna was already unclipping his leash, her hand brushing mine, like we were exchanging a baton, not custody. He's just been more settled, she said. No pacing, no barking. We thought, with everything you're recovering from, it might help not to worry about him. They weren't offering. They were informing me. They sat at my kitchen island, like it was still theirs to occupy. Jenna made tea in my favorite mug. Ellis grabbed himself a drink from my fridge, commenting on how someone had restocked well. I leaned against the counter, still wearing the same sweatpants I'd been discharged in, the gauze on my wrist, covered by the sleeve of my hoodie. They talked. I listened, or rather, I watched how easily they spoke over me, around me, about me. Then Ellis said it, between sips of sparkling water, like he was mentioning the weather. Oh, and we updated your medical file. Added me as your emergency contact again, just to be safe. I straightened. What do you mean? The hospital needed a name. You didn't list one when they admitted you, so we handled it. Handled it. Like I was a broken appliance. Like I'd forfeited the right to be consulted. I didn't respond. But later that night, after the door finally closed behind them and the silence returned, this time colder, I opened my laptop. First my hospital portal, then my bank, then the shared investment account, then utilities, then taxes. Each one showed a crack. Mail forwarding I hadn't requested. A credit card I never opened, with charges I couldn't trace. An electricity bill tied to my name, sent to Ellis and Jenna's home. They hadn't just watched my life while I was gone. They'd begun rearranging it, piece by piece, in my absence. Under the pretense of help, it wasn't just the dog. It was my name, my accounts, my silence, taken as compliance. And what unsettled me most wasn't what they took. It was how polite they were about it. How easily it all passed under the radar, hidden in just checking in, and just thought it'd be easier this way. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened a fresh document, typed a title in all caps, receipts. Then I began. Not with a plan for revenge, not yet. Just the truth, written down before they had time to bury it. Have you ever felt like someone made decisions for you without asking, because they assumed you wouldn't fight back? You're not the only one. The first thing I did was print everything, not screenshot, not email. I printed on thick, ivory paper stock, the kind usually reserved for resumes and bad wedding invitations. I wanted to feel the weight of what had been done in my name. The hospital log confirmed it. 3 days into my inpatient stay, someone accessed my file remotely. It was marked as a Proxy authorization update. The IP address traced back to Ellis's home Wi-Fi, not mine. No alert had been sent, no call to verify. The file showed Ellis as both my emergency contact and legal healthcare proxy, a status I had never granted, not even during the worst of it. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen those fields blank. My startup exit paperwork, maybe. After my father died? Probably. I'd always hated filling out the emergency contact line. It felt like a trap disguised as preparedness, but now that reluctance had become permission I never gave. By morning, I'd logged into 6 different accounts, and 4 of them had something off. A change of address request, dated 2 weeks prior. A new email added to my banking alerts. A tax document listed my current residence as my childhood home. It wasn't incompetence, it was choreography, and the signature at the bottom of the new mailing address form. It looked like mine, almost, just slightly too smooth. The K in Kravitz had a tail I never curled. The spacing was wider, cleaner. I pulled up a scanned copy of my actual signature from the notary file during my equity sale. Side by side, the forgery looked like someone had practiced, traced it, cleaned it up. I knew who had done it before I even checked the printer history. Last July, I'd had a paperwork emergency. One of the angel investors on our cap table needed a fresh ID scan for audit purposes. Jenna offered to help. She suggested I email the file to her personal printer, since mine was jammed. "I'll delete it right after," she'd said. I hadn't questioned her. I was tired. The deal was stressful. Jenna had a good poker face. Now, the same JPEG of my license appeared as the proof of identity attached to the utilities account and the updated insurance policy on my car, which, I should add, Ellis now drove. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit where I kept my hard backups. I hadn't been there in months. It was a climate-controlled steel tomb filled with old servers, contracts, and 10 years of entrepreneurial debris I didn't want to admit still mattered. I found what I was looking for, a manila envelope labeled Power of Attorney, Declined. Back when my lawyer had suggested I sign one just in case, I'd refused. The documents had been printed. We just never signed them. Inside was the original draft, blank signature lines and all. The real signature was missing because I had never agreed. But that hadn't stopped them from inventing one. I returned home, sat in my office, and laid everything out like a detective mapping a crime scene. Tax records, IP logs, forged signatures, proof of address inconsistencies. Each document wasn't damning on its own, but together they whispered something deliberate. This wasn't someone just trying to help. This was someone testing how much of me they could take before I noticed. And I had noticed, too late for comfort, but right on time for clarity. I started keeping a second document, separate from the receipts file. This one I labeled Timeline. It was colder, less narrative, more surgical. I wrote, July 14th, Jenna scans my ID, says it's for investor paperwork. August 2nd, utilities account opened in my name. Address, Durkhees Ellis's house. September 9th, medical portal updated. IP equals Ellis Home Network. September 14th, credit card opened. Charges include spa visit, Apple Watch, crate, and barrel. September 18th, Ellis calls hospital to confirm proxy status. Notes say, patient unreachable. Unreachable. That word lodged itself in my throat. I wasn't unreachable. I was sedated. Because a psychiatrist had finally convinced me to sleep through the shame long enough to heal. And while I was asleep, my brother took the keys to my life and made himself at home. I called my mother later that night, not because I expected help, but because I needed to hear it out loud. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she'd practiced this script. "Oh, honey, I'm sure they were just trying to make sure things didn't fall apart while you were, recovering." I didn't answer. "I mean, your brother's always been so good with practical things. You've said that yourself." Mom, I interrupted. They forged my signature. My tax records are rerouted. My car insurance lists a driver who isn't me. This isn't miscommunication. There was a pause, then a sigh so light it felt almost staged. Well, you were going through a lot. Maybe they thought you needed support. No, I said, the word firmer now. They thought I wouldn't notice. That night, I opened a third file. This one I labeled Fallout. It would be the one I'd use when everything I'd gathered had to go somewhere official. Court, maybe, arbitration, or just an inbox marked legal at, where the silence gets louder than words. Because this wasn't about protecting myself anymore. This was about reminding them I hadn't died. I started noticing patterns, not just in what they'd changed, but in what they avoided. Ellis no longer texted. Jenna didn't send her usual passive-aggressive recipe suggestions. Even my mother, who once called 3 times in a day to check on the color of my bed sheets, had gone unusually quiet. The silence wasn't kindness, it was strategy. A calculated waiting game. Delay just long enough to make me second-guess my own memory. Act warm, but vague. Never admit. Never explain. They knew I wouldn't go nuclear. Not publicly. Not yet. But they'd underestimated how quickly silence can become its own kind of communication. I received a call from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Hey, just checking in. Mom said you were, readjusting after everything. Her tone was sugary with pity, like she wasn't quite sure if I'd been institutionalized or possessed. Probably both, based on what she'd been told. I asked her plainly, "What did your mom say?" A long pause. "Just that you've been through a lot and maybe needed space, and that Ellis has been managing things for you until you're, like, stable again." There it was, stable. That word was doing heavy lifting behind the scenes. I knew exactly who had given that script to the rest of the family. And it wasn't just Ellis. Velma had always preferred rehearsed concern over truth. It gave her the upper hand of moral superiority. Worried, but graceful. I went to see her that Sunday. I didn't call first. Her house looked exactly the same as it had when I was a teenager. Doilies on the armrests, a decorative bowl of potpourri that had lost its scent years ago, and photos arranged to showcase everyone's best version of themselves, except mine. My latest photo on the shelf was from 2018, pre-exit, pre-breakdown, pre-worth questioning. She greeted me like I was an old neighbor, not her daughter. "You should have told me you were coming," she said, forcing a smile. I would have made tea. I sat down without responding. Why is Ellis telling people I'm not stable? She blinked once, slowly. Sweetheart, no one's saying that. Then why do I feel like everyone around me is waiting for me to relapse? She sighed and rubbed the bridge of her nose, the way she did when she wanted to appear tired, not guilty. Families talk, Callan. You've been through a lot. You disappeared. You didn't even tell me where you were going. I was in crisis, not on vacation. I know, she said, her voice soft. And I understand. But when people love you, they step in. Maybe they overstep, but it comes from a good place. Did it come from a good place when Ellis filed a guardianship petition behind my back? That stopped her. Her smile cracked slightly. I don't know anything about that. You signed as a character reference. Velma folded her hands in her lap. I just thought it might be easier. For you. I don't remember standing up. I just remember the weight in my chest, shifting from confusion to clarity. Not easier, not better, just easier. For them. Because if I was legally compromised, emotionally fragile, financially silent, then I became convenient. A vault they didn't have to break into, just hold the key to. Back at home, I opened a browser and searched something I hadn't dared until now. Emergency power of attorney abuse by family. The results were immediate. Forum posts, anonymous confessions, long threads full of women, most of them over 30, detailing how their mental health became the backdoor for theft. Bank accounts rerouted, real estate transferred, legal identity chipped away at with the excuse of help. And almost every story started the same way. They meant well. I clicked through one of the links and found a resource site for legal protections against familial financial manipulation. On it was a checklist titled, Signs You're Being Silenced for Convenience. I read each one, and by the end, my hands were shaking. You've been removed from group family decisions without notice. You've been told you're too sensitive or not ready. Documents have been signed on your behalf. You're being treated like a beneficiary, not a participant in your own life. I went back to my phone, opened a group chat I hadn't checked in months. Kravitz Core. The last message I'd sent was a birthday emoji for Joni 6 months ago. The conversation had continued without me since then. Hundreds of messages, photos, shared plans. I wasn't removed. I was ghosted. Worse, I was written out. In the middle of a thread about planning a family BBQ, I found something I hadn't expected to see. A casual mention of, when we take over the lake house paperwork, my lake house, purchased 3 years ago under my name, funded by my exit deal. It was being discussed like it was theirs already, like I was no longer the owner, like I was just a technicality they hadn't filed away yet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I printed the entire chat. Then I added a new tab to my folder. This one wasn't called Receipts or Timeline. It was called Case. Because I finally understood. They weren't just hoping I'd go back to being quiet. They were banking on it. What do you call it when someone removes you from your own life, then says they were protecting you? Sometimes silence isn't peace. It's just the sound of being erased. There's a particular kind of cold that sets in when you realize your name, your literal name, is being used by people who've decided they know better than you do what your life should look like. It isn't rage, not right away. It's something slower, more surgical. It's the moment you stop looking for explanation and start documenting for evidence. I went back to the lake house that weekend, not for nostalgia, not even for peace, but because I needed to confirm whether what I read in that family group chat was just speculation or a done deal. The driveway had fresh tire marks. The key code on the front door had been changed. When I tried the spare hidden under the back porch brick, a trick only I had ever used, it was gone. I didn't knock. I didn't call. Instead, I sat in the car and opened the security app still linked to my account. The cameras were down, offline, disabled, but that wasn't the part that twisted something in me. The mail slot was stuffed. At the top was an envelope addressed to Ellis Kravitz. Underneath it, another one, to Jenna. My name wasn't on a single piece of it. They were already living in it, and they'd made me invisible before even changing the deed. Back home, I placed every document I'd collected on the dining table. Each folder was color-coded, each tab labeled, receipts, timeline, case, and now, asset misuse. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. It was theft, dressed in caretaking. I booked an appointment at a law office, specializing in financial abuse and elder law, not because I was old, but because those were the lawyers who had seen this pattern before. Women being erased by their families, not through brute force, but paperwork and good intentions. The receptionist didn't blink when I explained why I was there. When I sat down with the lawyer, a woman named Morgan, she asked one question after reading my documents. Have they attempted guardianship? I nodded. Ellis filed a petition while I was in the facility. He withdrew it before it reached hearing. Probably thought I'd never find out. Morgan's jaw didn't tighten in surprise, only recognition. You're not the first, you won't be the last. But if they've tried once, they'll try again, especially if you start to push back. She reached for a folder and pulled out a standard cease and desist template. Do you want to start quietly or directly? Quietly, I said. For now. Because I didn't want them to see me coming. Not yet. That night, I opened the original adoption contract for Buddy, the legally binding one I had signed the day I picked him up from the shelter. I flipped to the last page, my signature, my address, my phone number. Then I pulled up his current vet records. Alice and Jenna had transferred them. New address, new emergency contact. No mention of me. My hands trembled, not with anger, but something worse. They didn't just take my dog, they reassigned his loyalty on paper. Like I was gone, permanently. Like I was a ghost they could rewrite into absence. I made a copy of everything and forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I added a new file to the growing collection on my desk. Pet custody fraud. Because every small thing they took was a piece of my autonomy. And if they thought the dog wouldn't matter in court, they hadn't learned who I was before I shattered. In the days that followed, I began changing passwords, updating security, adding two-step verification to every bank, every medical record, every social login. I revoked every power of attorney that had ever been provisionally signed, even the harmless ones from a decade ago. I revoked access to the lake house. I called the utility companies and froze all accounts tied to my name. I left no note. I didn't explain. When the locks were changed back, Ellis texted me a single word. "Really?" I didn't answer. I forwarded the message to Morgan instead. She added it to the file. A week later, a voicemail came from Velma. Her voice was a blend of wounded and rehearsed, like she was trying to win a custody case in the court of sympathy. "I just don't understand why you're making this a war. Ellis and Jenna have done nothing but protect you. You think this is revenge, but it's protection. Don't turn your back on the people who love you most." I replayed the message twice, and the second time, I heard it clearly. Not love, ownership. She didn't want me to come back. She wanted me to fall back in line. The next morning, I picked up the cease and desist letters, 3 copies, professionally bound, sent by certified mail to Ellis, Jenna, and Velma. I didn't sign them with anger. I signed them with finality, because now they knew. I wasn't asking. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. A neatly written card on thick cream-colored stationery, tucked inside a matching envelope. Velma always had a gift for presentation, believing that elegance could disguise intention. The note was simple, carefully polite. "Family dinner, this Sunday, 6 p.m. We'd love to see you. Let's clear the air." She didn't say, "We're sorry," or even, "We understand." Instead, she used a carefully curated phrase that implied reconciliation without ever acknowledging wrongdoing. I stared at the words for a long while, considering all that had already been taken from me: my autonomy, my home, even Buddy. A younger version of myself would have felt obligated, even hopeful, but that version was long gone. In her place stood someone older, quieter, and no longer willing to confuse good manners with genuine kindness. This wasn't an invitation to heal. It was an invitation to surrender, and I was done surrendering. I arrived at Velma's house just before 6, dressed simply in dark trousers and a soft sweater, neutral enough to show respect, serious enough to warn them I wasn't here for idle talk. I carried nothing but a slim leather folder, the paperwork from my attorney, printed neatly inside. Velma opened the door herself, her expression carefully set in a welcoming smile, as if none of our recent interactions had happened at all. "Callan, sweetheart, I'm glad you came," she said softly, stepping aside to let me pass. There was no embrace, no warmth, just a practiced calm, polished to perfection. The dining room was already arranged, as if staging a family portrait. Jenna was fussing gently with the placement of silverware, her eyes glancing toward me only briefly. Ellis stood by the window, swirling a glass of wine he had clearly been nursing before my arrival. Neither of them spoke a word, but their silence said everything. Dinner began as a carefully choreographed dance of politeness. Velma talked about trivial things: the neighborhood committee, new garden plants she'd purchased, the weather forecast for the weekend, as though this evening were entirely ordinary, as though I hadn't recently discovered that my family had quietly moved to take control of my entire life. After a long pause, Ellis finally cleared his throat. "Callan, I understand you're upset," he began gently, as though explaining basic math to a child. "But everything we've done was because we care. Nothing sinister, nothing illegal." I reached calmly for my leather folder, placed it gently on the table beside my untouched plate, and met his gaze steadily. You forged my signature, Ellis. You took control of property and accounts that belonged to me without my consent. That's not concern. It's theft. Velma shifted uneasily in her chair, her voice faltering slightly. Sweetheart, theft is a strong word. Ellis was just trying to protect you during a difficult time. Protecting someone implies they're involved, aware, or at least informed, I replied, steadying my voice. What you did was assume my silence meant permission. You replaced my decisions with your own, hoping I'd never wake up enough to object. Jenna spoke softly from across the table, her eyes wide, playing innocent confusion, masterfully. Callan, why are you treating us like criminals? We're family. I turned to her directly. Family doesn't entitle you to my identity, Jenna. It doesn't entitle you to take my dog, my finances, or my home. But you did, all without asking me. Velma's hand shook slightly as she set down her fork. Her carefully maintained facade was slipping, revealing a flash of genuine anxiety beneath. Can we please stop talking as if this is some courtroom? You're making it sound worse than it was. We just didn't know how to handle the situation. Her words echoed, the hidden truth now plainly visible between us. They hadn't known how to handle me. Independent, wealthy, but broken enough to become a target. And when the opportunity presented itself, they hadn't hesitated. There is only one way to handle someone's crisis, I said, gently but firmly. You respect their dignity and their rights. You don't rewrite their life behind closed doors and call it compassion. Ellis leaned forward, his voice edged with frustration. What exactly are you asking us to do, Callan? Undo everything? Pretend nothing happened. I'm not asking anything, I said, opening the leather folder. I'm telling you, legally, explicitly, and for the record, that you no longer have any authority or access to any part of my life. I pushed the legal notices across the table toward each of them, professionally prepared, carefully signed, neatly notarized. I watched as Ellis's confident expression drained into startled silence. Jenna's composure flickered into something close to fear, and Velma's careful neutrality finally fractured. You can't be serious, Velma whispered, barely audible. I'm entirely serious, I said quietly, with no anger or bitterness. This isn't revenge, Mother. It's correction. A line you crossed, and now a boundary restored. I stood slowly, the weight of years of silence now shedding from my shoulders. The difference is that you all acted secretly, but I'm responding openly. You decided my silence meant submission, but you were wrong. I was simply waiting for the right moment to speak clearly. Velma opened her mouth, but no words came. Ellis stared down at the table, and Jenna refused to meet my gaze. I left the three of them sitting in stunned silence at the table, surrounded by the perfect dinner they had prepared for a woman who no longer existed. Outside, in the soft darkness of the evening, I breathed deeply. The quiet felt different now, clean, unburdened, free. As I walked toward my car, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. For the first time, my steps felt solid, purposeful, and entirely my own. Have you ever had to draw an unbreakable line with someone you loved, just to reclaim your own identity? I didn't know the rumors had started until I received a message from my cousin Lena. She sent it like a casual check-in, as if she hadn't been radio silent for months. Hey, just wondering how you're doing. I heard you've been going through something. Praying for clarity, sweet girl. Clarity. It was the word people used when they wanted to talk down to you without sounding unkind. Then came another text, this time from Aunt Dorothy. Your mother mentioned you're in a hard season. Just know you're still loved even when you're not yourself. There was no anger in the messages, no accusation, just a low-level hum of concern. Thinly veiled, sweetly sharpened, and clearly rehearsed. I didn't need to ask where it came from. Velma had started the soft campaign. If she couldn't discredit my facts, she'd discredit my state of mind. And the worst part? She wouldn't say I was lying. She'd say I was confused. It was subtler, more dangerous, and far more effective. I opened the family Facebook group that no one thought I still monitored. There, between posts about baby photos and casserole recipes, was a vague status from Velma. It's hard when someone you love pushes you away during a time of crisis, but love means letting go, even when it hurts. The comments were predictable. You're such a strong mother. They'll come back around. Mental health is such a struggle these days. Not one person mentioned my name. But I was the shadow in every word. It wasn't enough for them to violate my autonomy. Now they were rewriting the story, one post and whisper at a time. I wasn't the woman they had tried to control. I was now the unstable one who'd lashed out without reason. The tragic daughter, the bitter sister, the one who'd gone too far, and it worked. Because it wasn't just one big lie. It was dozens of small distortions, strung together into something harder to fight, a reputation. I spent that night lying on my living room floor, the ceiling above me unmoving, while my phone buzzed with distant condolences I didn't ask for. I wasn't angry, not in the way I expected. What I felt was closer to mourning, because they hadn't just turned people against me, they had taught them to doubt my clarity. So that if I ever told the truth, it would sound like delusion. Gaslighting isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a series of soft-spoken updates, delivered over coffee and scripture, until even your name starts to feel unreliable. The only person who hadn't messaged me was Joni. And that silence said more than anything else. So I reached out. Just a simple line. "You okay?" She replied 10 minutes later. "Mom says not to talk to you right now, that you're overwhelmed. Are you?" I paused before responding. I knew what this was, not a challenge, not a test. It was a 12-year-old girl trying to balance loyalty and logic. So I answered her with the truth. Overwhelmed, sometimes. Confused? Number sad. Definitely. But I'm not the things they're saying. And I miss you. There was no reply that night. But the next day, a notification popped up on my phone. Joni had watched one of the videos I'd privately uploaded for safekeeping. Unlisted, linked only in an old shared email. The title, "The Paper Trail, My Story." I'd started recording pieces of it weeks ago, mostly as documentation, not for the courts, for myself. A record that I had lived this, that I had not imagined it. I didn't know she still had access, but she watched it, and an hour later, she sent me one more message. "That's not what they told me. I believe you." I sat down on the floor of my bedroom and cried for the first time in weeks, because I didn't need everyone to believe me. I just needed someone not to look away. That evening, Joni sent me a screenshot, a group chat I wasn't supposed to see. Kravitz core, same thread as before, but this time more brazen. Velma had typed, "She's unraveling. Ellis says not to engage, let her wear herself out." And then from Jenna, "We're the ones holding it all together. She's burning bridges that can't be rebuilt." Joni had scrolled back and highlighted the message. Underneath it, she wrote, "You were right. They never planned to let you come back." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then I turned it back on and hit record on my phone. Sometimes you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need one person to stop pretending they don't see what's happening. What would it take for you to tell your version of the story when everyone else already thinks they know it? I didn't go public. Not in the way people usually mean when they say it. I didn't post a viral thread. I didn't upload a tell-all video with dramatic music and a black screen at the start. There was no confession booth, no dramatic call-out. But I told my story, piece by piece, through documents, yes, but also through presence. I sent everything to the estate attorney Velma had once referred me to when I first bought the lake house. He now had a new client, me. I sent the digital receipts and forged documents to a neutral third-party auditor, just to have it cataloged, just so it wouldn't disappear again. I emailed a private letter to 3 family members, not involved, ones who'd reached out softly, asking if there was more to the story. I gave them the version no one else had bothered to ask for, the version that included proof. And most importantly, I gave Joni access to everything. Not because I wanted her to choose sides, but because I wanted her to grow up knowing that truth doesn't always scream. It builds, quietly, thoroughly, until it becomes undeniable. The fallout wasn't loud. That's what surprised me. Velma didn't respond, not even a rebuttal. Jenna sent a one-line email. Please don't involve Joni in your narrative. I didn't reply. Ellis tried to freeze me out of a shared family fund that I had already transferred weeks ago. When he realized the door had been locked from my side, not his, he stopped trying. The silence wasn't peace, but it was power. Mine, finally. Weeks passed, then a month. One morning, I received a notification. Change of property record request denied, county clerk office. They had tried to transfer the lake house again. This time without signatures, just influence. But they hadn't accounted for the cease and desist order already on file. That was the moment I knew. They hadn't just wanted my silence. They had needed it. Because without it, they had nothing to stand on but the stories they'd invented. I sold the lake house 2 weeks later, not out of spite, but because I didn't want to walk through it wondering which parts of me they had tried to live inside. I didn't want to keep a place where my name had been used like a placeholder. I used the money to move to a smaller place outside the city where no one knew me as Velma's daughter or Ellis's sister, just Callan, just myself. I bought new furniture, adopted a second dog, built a bookshelf taller than me, and filled it with everything I once said I'd get around to reading. I created new logins, new accounts, new rituals. But I didn't start over. I continued. One Saturday, Joni came to visit. She carried a backpack and a guarded smile, the kind that doesn't quite trust happiness yet, but wants to try. She stayed for the weekend. We baked. We walked. We didn't mention the others, not out of avoidance, but because sometimes healing looks like not needing to relive the hurt every time. On Sunday night, she sat on the couch beside me, legs tucked under a throw blanket, and asked quietly, "Are you ever going to talk to them again?" I thought about it, about the quiet contempt in Velma's voice, about Ellis's precision and Jenna's deflection, about the story they'd built while assuming mine would stay buried. Maybe, I said, but not as the version they want. She looked at me. Which version is that? The one who disappears. I don't know what reconciliation looks like for other people. Mine looked like boundaries held, like silence used as a shield, not a prison, like refusing to return to the table just because someone said it. People think revenge is about punishment, but sometimes revenge is a life they can't edit anymore. The version of the story that survives isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the one with receipts, resolve, and no need to be invited back. Would you trust your silence again if the wrong people had already used it against you? If this story resonated with you, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.